Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training, we're going to be going over the 6W questions for movement. So this is going to be a rock solid, jam-packed, action-packed training, and I'm super excited to get into it with you. So inside of this training, if you remember, what we are doing right now is we are continuing our theme of the science of transformation. And what we're looking at is really the 6Ws of movement, which is the second pillar of health, right? So we talked about nutrition and we went through all of the 6Ws for nutrition. And now we're on movement, and then there is sleep and there is recharge, okay? Now, just to go ahead and refresh your memory, what we are doing right now is we are laying the foundation for you to go through your own personal transformation, so that way you can go ahead and help others go through their transformation as well. Okay, so just a reminder, I know this certification and going through this entire process is not overnight, but I promise you it is absolutely worth it because it is going to transform your life for the rest of your life. And so being able to allocate a couple weeks, a couple months, when you look at the grand scheme of things, is absolutely just a drop in the ocean. And so it is absolutely worth it for you to be able to go through this process properly. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the 6Ws of movement, because in this training, we said we're going to go ahead and hit all of the 6W questions for movement. Now, the question that you might have is, but Coach Yasin, we spent a bunch of trainings going over all of the W's for nutrition, and now you're saying that we're going to hit all of the 6W questions of movement in just one training? Yup. Why? Because even though each of the 4 pillars of health can be broken down into multiple in-depth trainings, the reason why we can structure the 6Ws all into one training for movement is because, number one, nutrition is one of the most challenging topics, okay? So that's number one. That's why we needed multiple trainings in order to go through it. Number two is that in a remote wellness setting, typically, nutrition is going to be one of the biggest levers that we can pull for our students to have a transformation. And so that's why we wanted to spend extra time on it, because it is such a high ROI topic, okay? And then number 3 is that typically movement, sleep, and recharge are much simpler to wrap our head around, as well as being able to help students with also. So that way it's very straightforward, and that way we can go ahead and knock it out inside of one training. And so when we talk about what that looks like visually in order to actually knock out the 6Ws of movement all in one training, this is the actual visual, and this is what it is going to look like right here, okay? So at the top, we have health, and then we have the pillar right here of movement. And then with the pillar of movement, this is what we're talking about. We're going to be going over the question of what, why, how, when, where, and who. And so this is going to be the visual that we go ahead and follow along throughout this entire training, so that way we can successfully go ahead and hit all 6 of the W's for movement. Okay, now, before we go ahead and hop into that, I got a couple quick notes. Pay attention with me, because these are going to be very important notes for you. Is that a question that might come up at this point is, hey, Coach Yasin, I understand we're going through the 6Ws, we're doing all of these 4 pillars of health, but is all of this really going to make me $10,000 plus per month online? Because as you go through this module, right, even though it can feel like a grind, what I want you to do is I always want you to remember your North Star and what we are doing here. Right now, we are inside of phase number 1, which is going to allow you to have the power, the value to then actually implement the income and the business training. Because at the end of phase number 1, you are going to have this product. And what is this product? This product is your transformation program that you are going to be able to charge using the income and the business training that is actually valuable to the prospect, and they are willing to pay $1,200, $2,400, $3,600 for it, okay? And so that is why we need to remember this and keep this as our North Star. Because if you are unable to actually provide adequate value, the truth is that the vast majority of people, the reason they struggle with making an income online or really in any aspect of business is because what they are providing just is not valuable enough. And so we are solving that problem here in phase number 1, where you are getting the entire toolbox for health transformation, as well as all of the skills and the process of how all of that is going to be structured. That's all happening inside of phase number 1. And then specifically in this module, we're going over the toolbox for health transformation. And then when we get to module 5, we're going to walk you through exactly how you are going to deliver that and implement that for your students. And then the beautiful thing is you have this massive toolbox that you can pick from to really create a truly wow experience for your students. And so I'm telling you right now, mark my words, the reason why so many people struggle with making an income, period, is because their skill set is not valuable. It's not something that actually creates a wow experience to the end user. And so phase number 1 is solving that for you. And so this module, specifically module 3, even though it can feel like a grind, what it is doing is it's ensuring that you are not a one-trick pony when it comes to remote wellness, and you are not somebody who just has one thing that they do and then that's it, okay? Because this is a timeless skill set in a timeless trillion-dollar industry that is going to feed you and your family for the rest of your life, because you are literally transforming your life and the life of everyone else around you by providing insane value, okay? And so it is these modules that are going to allow you to not only get your remote wellness certification, but we said that's secondary. We don't really care about traditional education and their overemphasis on pieces of paper, right? But ultimately what we are actually getting from this is the power to provide value, which is going to then allow us to put into production in phase 2, so that way we can charge high ticket prices for it. I hope that is absolutely clear. And I say it in every single training. I really spend like the first 5, 10, 15 minutes of every single training hitting this over and over and over and over again, because we as humans need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And this is so absolutely critical to always keep at the top of your mind, okay? So the last point that I want to mention here before we actually get into the training, and I'm telling you, sometimes some of these introductions that we go into the trainings, sometimes they are as good or as useful than the actual training itself. And that's why it's so important that you take the time to listen to me inside of these introductions, okay? The other thing is that as you get closer to the end of module number 3, you might be getting tired. And guess what? That's a good thing. Why? Because it means that you are expanding. This is the process, because most of the time when you are making the most amount of progress in your life, you are feeling wildly uncomfortable, okay? The entire time you feel like crap, you're exhausted, you feel like your life is out of balance, you're in a bad mood half the time, and you're tired because you're putting all of this energy into something. The reason is because when you are expanding, you have to be expending a ton of energy. And this applies to every single area of your life, regardless if that's shifting your identity in health, wealth, relationships, anything. In order to expand, you must first expend. And guess what? It doesn't always feel good in the moment, but guess what? It feels amazing when you actually reach the goal. So rather than labeling that feeling that you are having right now as a problem, rather than saying, oh man, I'm starting to feel tired, I'm starting to do this, right? It's a problem. Remember, we talked about labeling human emotions as problems. You want to understand that this is a fact of the process. It's normal, and it's exactly what the process should feel like, okay? You will encounter so much struggle in this path, but you must not give in. It is necessary for you to struggle in order for you to grow. It is necessary for you to get tired so you can expand. So do not fall prey to these guru marketers out there that are promising you get rich quick. This is the path. This is the path in which you have to expend energy in order to expand. This is how you become better, so that way you can provide value to others in which you can actually charge for. This is the real way to financial freedom. This is the way to making $10,000 plus per month income remotely online on your own schedule, while also transforming the lives of others, okay? So ultimately, remember, you may not be ready right now, but through this process in which you are expanding and you are expending so much energy, you will become ready, okay? So just remember, all we're doing right now is you're just planting seeds, and all of this is just a reference for you in the future. So you're just really planting those seeds, going through the activities here, doing your best at the time that you are doing this. And so your goal right now is not to think, oh man, how am I going to answer all of these questions to my students? We will get to that. You are not ready for that right now. All we're doing is planting seeds. Do not create monsters where monsters do not exist. So please don't worry about anything. Enjoy the process. Let the light bulbs go off in your head, okay? Promise me you won't get overwhelmed, because your number one priority is to keep moving. You got this. You're doing great. Remember my brand of glue, the Yasin glue? Stick with me. You're doing great. And so that is what I wanted to go ahead and emphasize here in the beginning of this training as we get towards the end of this module. And so with that being said, we got the training outline here for you guys as a reference. And let's go ahead and hop into the meat and potatoes with the first question of movement what? And so this first question of movement what is one that actually has a lot of misconception around it, okay? Because there is a very common misconception when it comes to exercise, because most people, when they think about exercise, they think about the gym, they think about working out, but the truth is that they could not be any more wrong, because I'm here to tell you that public opinion is completely wrong about what exercise actually is. Working out, quote unquote, is a part of exercise, but it's only a small possible piece of it. Okay. So then, all right, I understand that, but you might ask the question, then what actually is exercise? Well, there are two reframes that are extremely beneficial when it comes to understanding what exercise actually is. Now, you might have a question. Hey, coach, what is a reframe? Well, you're going to be learning about what reframing is as a skill when we get into module 4 and you start to learn the skills of what an RWP coach has. But in short, a reframe is a coaching skill in which we take something and put it into a new context so someone can see it from a completely different and new perspective. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and go over two reframes of what exercise actually is, so that way you can get to the bottom of answering the what question in regards to movement and exercise, okay? So the very first reframe that we're going to go ahead and talk about is where we actually define exercise here at the Remote Wellness Academy by reframing it as movement, okay? So we are reframing the word exercise to the word movement. Why? Because so many people have a negative connotation when it comes to the word exercise, right? They think, oh man, this is going to be hard. Oh man, this is going to cause me so much pain. Oh man, I'm going to have to sweat so much, right? And you have to remember that we talked about this. Words are just labeled thoughts. Words have power because of the fact that they are labeled thoughts. And so words are literally labeled ways of thinking. And so if someone has a certain labeled thought around the word exercise, then we're going to need to change the term into something that is easily more approachable for them. And so what do we do instead as we take this approach? What we do is when we talk to you and you talk to your students, you say, don't exercise. What do we do instead? We simply move our body in a way that feels good. What do? We simply move our body in a way that feels good. That's it. Because movement is just about moving your body, not for results, but because it feels good, because it feels pleasurable, because it feels fun. That's it, right? And so when somebody finds something that is pleasurable and fun, guess what? They are more likely to feel motivated to do it and start looking forward to it, and they're more likely to stick to it, right? Why is that the case? Because the way our brains and our limbic selves work is that we are programmed at a biological level in order to move away from pain and towards pleasure. And so the other cool part about reframing exercise as movement is that guess what? We as humans were designed to move. And so when you combine pleasure and fun, and it is something that our bodies are naturally designed to do, you have this awesome combination that is transformational for you and your students. And so that is the first reframe. When we actually reframe exercise as movement, all of a sudden it opens a massive other door of possibility of what's actually possible with exercise, because now exercise is really just movement. That's it. The second reframe that is extremely helpful for us as we start to define what movement actually is when we talk about movement and attaching it to this understanding of something called play. Okay, so what is play? Typically, when you think about the word play, it's one of those words that is so rarely used in adulthood, right? We think of play as something that kids do, right? Or we think of play that's like, oh, we only do that when we want to be like, have fun or something like that. But the truth is that the actual meaning of play is so much deeper than that. Because the truth is that Play is defined as something that we do simply for the joy of doing it rather than a means to an end, okay? So I want you to imagine for a second what life would look like without play, right? There'd be no humor, no innovation, no creativity, there'd be depression, there'd be physical inactivity, right? And then imagine a life with play. You're talking about humor, optimism, physical activity, deep engagement. And so that's why play and connecting it to this understanding of movement is so beneficial, right? And then on top of that, there's this fellow by the name of Stuart Brown, and he's actually the founder of something called the National Institute for Play. I know. It's a real thing, okay? And Mr. Stuart Brown, he says that the opposite of play is not work, it's depression, okay? And so by definition, play is purposeless, all-consuming, and fun. And so as Stuart Brown illustrates, play is anything but trivial, because what he did is that he studied the effects of play on 6,000 plus individuals, and they found that play actually has significant power to improve everything from personal health to relationships. He says that play leads to brain plasticity, adaptability, and creativity. And nothing fires up the brain like play. And just for your future reference, whenever anybody says this fancy schmancy word called brain plasticity, it's just another word for saying making it easier for you to become in the becoming process. It's basically allowing your brain to mold and change and transform. And so through play, you can actually break your version 1.0 character and become your version 2.0 character more easily. And so in essence, play isn't something that just helps us wind down or take a break from the essential work. Play is essential in and of itself, right? And so, side note, Stuart Brown actually has a number of great talks and TED Talks about play. And so, if you ever get a chance, would highly recommend checking those out in regards to the beneficial aspects of play, not only to movement and not only to health, but also to every area of life also. And so the question then becomes okay, well, how does play actually connect to movement, right? The belief that movement has to be hard in order for us to actually get benefit from it, what it does is that belief hurts us in many ways. Number one, when we think that movement is hard, it actually prevents us from doing it. We don't actually want to do it, right? And then number two is that even when we are able to force ourselves to move, because we are thinking, oh man, movement is hard, that prevents us from actually enjoying the movement while we are doing it. But on the flip side, with this reframe that we are talking about, in which we code in our brains that movement is playtime, is that having this feeling of playtime, whether that be by ourselves or with others, is extremely important for our health, right? And so what if something that was fun and playful didn't have to be something that we struggled with, wasn't something that was quote unquote hard, right? In order for us to be able to get a good workout in, right? And so this reframe allows us to reintroduce movement and exercise in our lives in a way that allows us to be playful again and really open up ourselves to the possibility that we have never thought about before. And so ultimately, when we ask ourselves the question, what if movement didn't have to be hard, right? What if movement was actually playful and fun? And by asking this question, what we are doing is we're actually interrupting our default pathway in our brain, right? If you remember what we spoke about in the training Declaring Ourselves Broken, we talked about how the brain has pathways, right? Whenever we think of something in a certain way, there's a rut that is developed over time, again and again and again. And these are the default pathways inside of our brain. And so for a lot of people, these pathways have become wired to think that, exercise is hard, and therefore I'm going to avoid it. But when we start to open up this new possibility through this reframe, that movement is actually about playing, it's actually about enjoying, and it's actually about having fun. When we do this, what we start to do is we start to create a different and new pathway, and we are literally rewiring our brain at a physical level in order to experience life in a completely new way. Pretty cool, huh? This is really the power of reframes, that it allows us to literally transform our minds and think differently, okay? And so this is what we're going to be talking about and practicing more when we get to Module 4, but that is the second reframe that is extremely beneficial when we are defining what movement actually is. So the very first one that we spoke about was defining exercise as movement, and now the second reframe that we've gone ahead and talked about is that movement is actually play. All right. And so those are two very, very helpful reframes when we talk about defining what movement actually is. All right. Beautiful. Now, what's next? So now that we've talked about what movement actually is, the next question that you might have is, okay, well, what do I actually do for movement? And so this question of what do we actually do for movement, we're actually going to discuss that when we talk about the how question of movement. Okay, so remember, these are the 6 W's that we are going into, and we've just gone ahead and covered the what question. And then when we get to the how question, we'll talk about what to actually do for movement. But before we do that, we're now going to hop over to the why question and then move on from there after that. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into movement why. And the movement why question, and whenever really we ask the question of why, it's all about importance. And we're asking ourselves the question, why is movement important? Because when it comes down to asking the why questions about movement, there really are 2 important why questions. Number 1, why should I move? Like, why is it even important for me to move? That's question number 1. And then question number 2 is, why do people struggle with movement? Right? These are 2 very beneficial why questions when it comes to movement. Of course, I'm sure there are many, many, many other why questions, but these are 2 that are very important that we are going to go ahead and touch on. So let's go ahead and talk about that first question. Why should I move? Okay, now there are entire books that are literally written on the topic of the benefits of movement. Okay, and this question of like, why should I move? It's kind of like a funny question because it wasn't even really a question until very recently. And the reason it wasn't even really a question until very recently is because the truth is, like we've talked about as a current theme of the new world that we live in, is that times have changed. And as a result, it is never in all of human history has it ever been a problem to be able to get humans to move, like ever, right? And so we talk about this visual, we talk about it a lot, right? Times have changed. For most of human history, it has never, ever been a problem in order to have to remind humans to move, ever. Right? Because the truth is, for the vast majority of human history, moving was actually a requirement in order for us to stay alive. However, in modern times, what has happened now in the new world as of the last couple decades, really over the last 10, 15, 20 years, is that all of a sudden, we no longer have to even get out of our chairs in order to actually stay alive. We literally now have Uber Eats, we have electricity within our homes, we have home entertainment. Literally, there's no reason that we even have to move. And very soon, we're going to end up like those people from WALL-E, the movie, in which they literally have these milkshakes or whatever that keep them alive and they don't even move at all, right, from their chairs. And so as a result, what has happened is that in the new modern world, we actually need to make an effort to go out of our way to move. And so what are some of the benefits of actually moving, right? To say that there are countless benefits is an understatement. Literally, there are so many benefits of moving that I had difficulty even finding the space inside of this guide in order to list them all, right? We talk about the release of neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, which releases stress and lowers anxiety and improves mood, strokes the metabolism, helps with muscle building, bone development, improve nutrient intake, improve digestion, improve sleep, balance the immune system, improve oxygen, boost energy, improve cellular aging, increasing self-esteem, integrating the mind and body, helping promote conscious state of mind, increasing focus, more blood pumped to the brain, help us regulate our blood sugar. We talked about how important that was, and literally countless other benefits to moving. Because the bottom line is this: your ability to live a life that is healthy and well is equally tied to nutrition as it is to movement. Because without movement, there is no life of wellness, okay? And so if this doesn't seal the deal for you and some of the data that I'm about to show you right now, I really have no idea what is going to help you with this, okay? Because think about this. The chance of death for those who are sedentary are those people that don't move much, okay, is 2 times. They have double the risk of premature death compared to those who actually move, okay? Can sedentariness cause death? I don't know if sedentariness is a word. We just made it up. However, look at this. Approximately 2 million deaths per year are attributed to physical inactivity. Think about that. 2 million people die every single year because we as humans are not moving more. If that doesn't show you the emphasis of how much times have changed, imagine for the vast majority of human history, we're talking about like 10,000 BC, until like the early 2000s, okay? Literally, people did not die from physical inactivity, okay? And now in the modern world, we have 2 million people dying every single year as a result of not moving more. How insane is that? This is absolutely insane, right? What happens when you are too sedentary? When you don't actually move, your chances of being overweight, developing type 2 diabetes or heart disease, and experiencing depression and anxiety is through the roof, okay? And then on top of that, can being sedentary, aka not moving, cause body pain? These are the consequences from our body being inactive. The muscles become smaller and weak, and they actually end up leading to chronic pain, okay? Look at this. 15 minutes of daily walking could save your life. Think about how insane that is, in that for the vast majority of human history, I'm going to repeat this again because I just can't get my head around how insane that is. People are dying today in the modern world because of something that has never, ever, 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 ever for the human history and the span of the human species has ever existed, which is that humans are not moving. We as human beings are not moving, okay? And so do you really need more evidence or proof to be able to prove to you that moving is actually good for you? In fact, it's not only good for you, it's critical for you. It is essential for you, okay? There are countless benefits that I was not even able to list inside of this document. And so when we say that movement is critical for us to be humans, that is an understatement. And so ultimately the problem is that we as humans were not designed or prepared for this new modern world that we live in. And the reason why we are having to learn all of these skills in order to thrive in the new world is because this is not something that any other humans in the history of mankind have ever experienced. And so this is why what we are going through inside of this program and the value that you provide as a remote wellness practitioner is being able to equip mankind with this new skill set that they have never ever needed before. And this skill set saves millions and millions and millions of lives every single year. Just from movement alone, just from this training alone, 2 million lives per year could be saved. Never mind what we talk about when it comes to nutrition, what it is that you've already learned. Never mind when it comes to sleeping. Never mind when it comes to recharging. There are millions and millions of lives at stake, and all of it is a problem because of the fact that the current school system and society's current paradigm has not been able to properly equip its inhabitants and its students with the proper education and skill set necessary for them to be able to thrive in this new world. And so this, ladies and gentlemen, is why what we are doing here at the Remote Wellness Academy is so important. Because through you, as students of the Remote Wellness Academy, you are going to be able to take this skill set, this transformation process to your students. And then through that way, we are able to create a dent inside of society's current paradigm and really equip the world with the tools that they need in order to thrive in this new world. There are so few people who are talking about this from this perspective and from this lens, and this is why what it is that we are doing here is so important. You can hear the passion in my voice about how absolutely critical this is, and this is the passion that you should feel as you are becoming a remote wellness practitioner, is that literally millions of lives at stake here. And through these skills, through these transformation, through these understandings, we are able to help and save so many more people so that way we can thrive in this new world and not just survive. And so there is so much more that I could say on this, but for the sake of brevity and making sure that we can actually get through this training, I just wanted to go ahead and emphasize this and why it's so important to understand why movement is so critical for us as human beings, okay? So that is the first question, which was, why should I move? We went ahead and addressed that one. The second why question that we're gonna go ahead and go over right now is why people struggle with movement, right? What are some of the common reasons why your students or even you yourself will struggle with movement? Well, the truth is that different people struggle with movement for different reasons. The most common reason is typically going to be people who are under exercising. They feel sluggish, they have a lack of motivation, those kinds of things. And then there are going to be occasional students who also struggle with over exercising, right? Depleting their body and their nervous system and those kinds of things. And then you're going to have some students, and this might even be you, is that they use exercise as a form of abuse or torture in order to get back at themselves for not following the rules of a diet. This is also something that is quite common, okay? And so how do we actually solve these struggles when it comes to movement? The answer is that we utilize different reframes, okay? And so we already went through two such reframes in that we were talking about defining movement, right? We said that movement reframe number 1 is really looking at exercise as movement. That by itself, that reframe is extremely helpful to help people not struggle with exercise and movement anymore. And then reframe number 2 is really being able to define movement as play. This is also a very, very, very beneficial reframe that helps people overcome that obstacle and that struggle when it comes to movement. Now, are those the only two reframes that we can have when it comes to movement? No, there are many, many, honestly, unlimited number of reframes that we could come up with. Another reframe that has been common that we've used is really starting to see movement as nourishment. When we start to be able to attribute, okay, wait a second, by me moving more, it is actually nourishing my body. That is also a very beneficial reframe. So ultimately what's going to happen is that as you start dealing with your students, as you start to be able to explore your own struggles with movement, you will start to figure out different reframes that work for you on your journey. And then those reframes really start to become beneficial and helpful for your students as well. And so these are just some certain reframes that we've talked about, but over time, you're going to have more and more reframes inside of your toolbox that you can help people overcome these mental obstacles when it comes to movement. And so that really is the second question when it comes to the question of why and movement. We talked about why do people struggle with movement? That was the second question that we just talked about. And then we also talked about why someone should move. Okay, so beautiful. That is now the second W out of the 6 W's for movement. We went ahead and finished what? And now we've gone ahead and finished why. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and tackle the how question of movement. So when we look at the how question of movement, it really is a jam-packed question, which is, hey, how should I actually move, right? What are the best ways for me to move, right? It's a very loaded question. And here's the thing. The how of exercise, the how of movement really is an industry that has been built on selling people the fact that, you know what? You need to believe that moving is hard. Literally, there's a $96.7 billion industry that is built on, hey, how big is the exercise industry, right? And so note, fitness is just another word that they use for exercise. And so in today's weird modern world that we have gotten into, it's all of a sudden really strange that we have started to believe that, you know what? Moving is hard. And the reason why that's a very strange thing to actually think about is that if you ever see kids before they hit the age of getting indoctrinated with tablets, what you will see is that, man, they don't stop moving. Like kids literally do not stop moving. In fact, parents have to purposely sit their kids in front of tablets and phones in today's crazy modern world in order to get them to stop moving. Now, this is a whole nother conversation about the adverse effects of this. Don't even get me started on that. But I'm just showing you what's actually going on in today's society, right? And so the point is that moving is not something that we need to be sold on, right? How to move is not something that is very, very vague or ununderstandable or incomprehensible by humans. In fact, we as humans were built and designed to move, right? We already know how to move, right? And so don't get confused by words like fitness or exercise or things like that, right? At the end of the day, all we are really talking about is just movement, right? And it's really all about keeping things simple, light, fun, playful, and exciting. That's it. And so even though there are literally unlimited ways in order for us to move or how we can move, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and explore 3 of those ways together, just so that way you have a mental framework of being able to tackle the question of how to move. Okay, so we're going to talk about menu, simple, and advanced. Those are the 3 that we're going to go ahead and tackle inside of this 6 W's question. Okay, so how to move menu. So the thing that you need to understand when it comes to how to move menu is that if really at the end of the day, all you need every single day is to really keep some sort of activity that is simple, light, fun, and playful and exciting, then really all you're doing is you can really create a list of those activities for yourself. And the list of those activities that are simple, light, playful, fun, exciting, that is what we kind of coined as the term movement menu, okay? So what is a movement menu? A movement menu really is just a list of fun movement options for you and your students when you have different energy levels and when you have different time constraints. Okay, so this is just an example of a big movement menu. And the reason why we call it a menu is because it's kind of like having a menu at a restaurant, right? Depending on what you are craving that day, depending on what your taste is, or depending on what variety you want, depending on how much time you have, right? All of those things, whatever you are drawn to, you can just kind of pick something from the movement menu. And the cool thing is that once you have that movement menu, all you got to do is look at it every single day and ask yourself, how would I like to move today? That's it. And then you wait for that answer to come from your body, not necessarily from your head. And that's really the power of having something like a movement menu, okay? So I want to talk to you very briefly about what it means to create a movement menu, okay, for yourself as well as for your students. Because the cool thing about designing your own movement menu is that as time goes on, you literally have your own cheat sheet for what it is that you actually enjoy doing when it comes to movement. Now, a quick side note with this, we will be providing you a template. However, it's very important to know how to be able to create your own movement menu for yourself, okay? On top of that, this is going to be another tool in your toolbox as an RWP as you work with your students to really be able to create a movement menu for themselves as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over 3 questions that are very vital and very helpful when actually creating your own movement menu. So these are questions that you can go over yourself, and then in the future, you will be able to walk your students through as well. Okay, now remember, this is not something you got to memorize. This is going to be here for your reference when you actually get to that point in your career. Okay, so question number 1 is going back to when you were a kid. And so the question to ask yourself here when you're designing your movement menu is, what kind of movement did I like to do when I was a kid? Okay, because a lot of times when we were kids, we had a very good idea of how we actually liked to move. And then when we became adults, we actually forgot what that looked like. And so now in adulthood, we can think, what is it that I actually liked to do back in the day? Because nowadays, when we become adults, we think, you know what? To do movement, I have to go to the gym. I have to get on the treadmill. I have to do this kind of stuff. We can think back. What was it that I liked to do as a kid? And so then all of a sudden it brings back that element of fun. It brings back that element of playfulness, right? And so this is the first question that we can explore when we actually talk about, hey, when we are designing our movement menu, we can look at what is it that we actually like to do when we were kids. Question number 2, how is it that we actually like to have fun with others? Because a big piece of transformation is accountability, okay? And so how do we create accountability around movement? The answer is other people. And so the question to ask ourselves here when we are exploring and designing our own movement menu is, what kind of movement would be fun to do with others, right? This could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be anybody. Right? So for example, myself, I really enjoy going on walks and hikes with my friends because we have some of the best conversations during that entire time. And so this is a phenomenal second question to explore when we are actually designing our very own movement menu, okay? And then finally, the third question that is very helpful to explore here is experimenting with the new, right? Because a lot of times when we were kids, we didn't always get to do what it is that we wanted to do, right? For a variety of reasons. And so a great question to ask when we are designing our movement menu is, what's something that I have never done or tried when it comes to movement, but I've always wanted to try? And so this is also a very helpful question when we are designing our movement menu. And so these are just 3 example questions that are good to explore. Obviously, you might be able to come up with many more, but these are 3 good questions to get you started when you are designing your own movement menu, okay? And so we've gone ahead and put together an example list for you. Again, this is just an example. It's going to be something that you create on your own as well for an activity, but we're going to go ahead and cut over to a quick mini training that is going to walk you through what that quick example looks like, just so that way you have it in the back of your head on what the reference for it is. All right, welcome to this quick mini training example about the movement menu. Just as a reminder, you will be designing your own movement menu as time goes on, so you do not want to rely only on this. This really is just an example. But like we talked about inside of the main training, the movement menu really is a list and a menu of all of the movement options that look exciting for you based off of different fitness levels, energy levels, time constraints, all that kind of stuff. We've gone ahead and compiled 72 different examples that you can explore with this example movement menu. But again, do not be restricted to these, and in future activities, you will go ahead and create your own. You can think outside the box. We went ahead and included inside the main training questions on how you can create your own movement menu, as well as how you will guide your students through this process as well. As always, if you would like to go ahead and create a copy of this, make sure you do go ahead and click on File, make a copy. But again, this is really just there for your reference, and then we will come back and revisit this in the future. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop back over to the main training. All right, welcome back from that quick mini training example of what the movement menu may look like. Because ultimately what you want to remember is that what we are doing here is that we are making the shift from the punishment paradigm to what we call the playful paradigm, right? The reason why we are asking ourselves these questions and designing our own movement menu is that we want to leave the punishment paradigm and get into the playful paradigm, right? Because remember, the bottom line of all of this is that we really just want to move in a way that feels fun, playful, and pleasurable. Why? Because when we move in a way that feels fun, playful, and pleasurable, we can actually stick with it for the rest of our lives. And ultimately, that is more important than anything else, right? Not everyone wants to have to go to the gym and do reps of some exercise. For some people, that's fun. For others, it's not. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out and find out over time what is playful and fun and pleasurable and enjoyable for us, right? So that way we don't have to stick with something that we don't enjoy, because ultimately the only way to get all of those benefits of movement that we talked about, it's not going to happen when we do it for like one day and then stop doing it for like 6 months. Ultimately, the real benefit comes when we actually find something that we enjoy and can stick with for the rest of our lives, regardless of what else is going on in our lives, we can actually stick with it. And so ultimately that is the very first way that we went ahead and explored, was the movement menu. As we start to answer the question of how to move, that was the very first one that we wanted to go ahead and explore. The second one that we're going to go ahead and explore now is what we call the how to move simple method. Okay, so the how to move simple method, because throughout your entire RWP career, you are going to have students that you come across that are going to ask you, hey, what is the least amount of exercise that I can do to get started in order to see these amazing benefits, right? And the simple answer to the question of how to move simply is, without a doubt, the answer is walking. In fact, it's literally just as simple as walking for 15 minutes a day. You can see here, this was Psychology Today. 15 minutes of daily walking could save your life, linked with 22% lower risk of death, okay? It's so dead simple that anybody who says that they can't do it, it's like, come on, right? In fact, so many research studies have been done on the benefits of even just walking, not 15 minutes a day, walking even as little as 10 minutes a day, okay? Here's one right here. Just adding 10 more minutes a day of walking could prevent 111,000 deaths per year. The number rose to 209,000 deaths when somebody walked an extra 20 minutes, and then 272 deaths a year could be prevented with just an extra 30 minutes a day of walking. I mean, like, come on. 10 minutes a day, right? If you or a student can't even do 10 minutes a day of walking, like, there's no words for that, right? There is absolutely no words for somebody who says, I can't walk for 10 minutes a day. And if somebody needs even more convincing on the benefits of walking, let's go ahead and look at that. Let's look at some of the other benefits that come from just walking, right? There are literally countless benefits, but here are just a few. Do you know what a centenarian is? A centenarian is somebody who lives to be 100 years old, okay? And if you look at all of the centenarians, they all have one thing in common. They walk every single day. Okay, so that's a beautiful benefit, okay? But you might be like, you know what, Coach Yasin, at that age, I don't even know if I would want to be a centenarian. Okay, well, what are some of the other benefits of walking? Well, do you remember all of the benefits that we spoke about when it came to movement, right? I'm not even going to go through all of them because we spoke about so many of them. Do you remember all of those benefits? Well, all of those benefits also apply to walking. Okay, beautiful. Do you need even more proof? Plus, let's go ahead and talk about some of the other benefits of walking, okay? Look at this. Walking for an average of 30 minutes more per day can lower the risk of heart disease, stroke by 35%, and type 2 diabetes by 40%, okay? Let's look at how many years walking can add to somebody's life expectancy. Walking every single day can add upwards of 2 decades to somebody's life. 20 years of additional life expectancy from just walking more regularly every single day. Let's look at some of the benefits of just walking 5 minutes a day. Let's say somebody is like, oh, I'm the most busy person on the planet and I really don't have time to walk and I can't walk 10 minutes a day. Well, look at just walking 5 minutes a day. Walking 5 minutes a day at a brisk walking pace can add up to 16 years of additional life expectancy from just walking 5 minutes additionally every single day, okay? What else? Look at the benefits of improving mood. Walking regularly can ease symptoms related to chronic mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, just from walking more every single day. I mean, literally at this point, I could go on and on and on because the benefits of walking are too many to count. And so I have just one question for you, one question clearly. Have your eyes been open yet to the amazing power of walking? Have your eyes been open yet? I hope so. Because this is how transformational just walking is. And so when we talk about small hinges open big doors, and we talk about transformation for your students and for yourself, we're literally just talking about just more deliberate, conscious walking can have massive implications for somebody's entire life. This is how important what it is that we are talking about is, okay? Now, the next question after hearing that might be, okay, Coach Yasin, I understand walking is very important. I'm going to go ahead and walk. But how much walking should I actually do, right? They hear that and they think, okay, you know what? I'm going to go into dogma mode. And all of a sudden, you know what? I heard on TikTok, I heard on Instagram, I heard on, whatever headline that the next social media platform is pursuing. And I heard that, you know what? You got to walk 10,000 steps, right? So I'm going to start walking 10,000 steps tomorrow, right? No. 10,000 steps is literally a completely random number that somebody made up because it sounds nice. It has a lot of nice zeros in it. Is it a good general guideline? Sure. But is it all one size fits all? But because it is a, nice round number, let's go ahead and say we are going to aim for, let's say, eventually 10,000 steps a day. Let's say, hypothetically, it's a nice number, has a lot of nice zeros in it, okay? Let's go with it, okay? So here's the thing. 10 minutes of walking is about 1,000 steps, all right? So if most people get in on average through their normal life about 3,000 to 3,500 steps a day, all they would really need to do is add in about 65 to 70 minutes more, and all of a sudden you'll hit that 10,000 steps, right? But remember, we just talked about how it only takes 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes of walking. It doesn't necessarily have to be 65, 70 minutes more, right? And then on top of that, the other reason why, just as a side note for your own reference, the reason why people like 10,000 steps, other than it being a nice round number, is because of the fact that typically 10,000 steps is how much it would take in order for somebody to burn 500 calories. Now, this is extremely variable. Like obviously a 4'11", person wouldn't burn the same amount of calories as like a 6'5" person, and they also walk 10,000 steps, right? But in general, it's just a general guideline, okay? And so obviously, as we learned before, 500 calories times 7 days a week would be about a pound of fat loss per week, because that's that 3,500 number that we've spoken about in the past, okay? So that's just another reference as to why 10,000 steps has gotten quite popular with a lot of people. The other question that comes up when we talk about walking is, okay, well, Coach Yasin, I'm a smart student and I've been paying attention, and we talk a lot about what gets measured, gets managed. And so the question is, how can I actually measure my walking so that way I can actually manage it properly? And the answer to that question is a step counter watch, okay? It's a very, very good tool to be able to measure walking, okay? Now, does that mean that I got to go out, coach, and get a $200 plus step counter watch? They're literally like $20 off of Amazon, okay? And don't worry, later on inside of this training in the activity, we're going to be making a recommendation as well. Super cheap. Literally anybody can afford them. You don't have to have some kind of fancy schmancy $100 plus watch in order to do that, okay? Question: are these step counters 100% accurate? Answer: no. They are all inaccurate, okay? Question: so then what's the point if they're all inaccurate? The point is that in science, if you are using a tool, as long as it is consistently inaccurate, you will still be able to use it in order to gauge progress if you are headed in the right direction. So example, let's say for example, the step counter says that you walked 2,000 steps today, okay? But you actually walked 3,000 steps. It doesn't matter because of the fact that if on that step counter you made progress from going from 2,000 steps to 2,500 steps, then guess what? You still walked an additional 500 steps more. And so we're using the watch as a tool in order for us to be able to gauge progress. The same thing applies for the weight scale inside of the bathroom, right? Whenever you weigh yourself, it doesn't matter if the weight scale is actually accurate to your actual weight, because it's going to be consistently inaccurate, which is going to allow us to know that we are headed in the right direction. So I hope that makes sense. If you are still confused on this topic, go ahead and ask us in the student community. Happy to answer any questions for that. But I hope that makes sense, because that even though it's inaccurate, it's still very helpful for us as a tool. The other question that might come up in regards to this is, can I just use my phone? The answer to that is typically because you don't have your phone on with you always, having some sort of watch is a more helpful tool. Question, can I use my Fitbit and Apple Watch? Answer, yes, absolutely. Question, do I need to use a step counter forever? Answer, nope. It is just a good and fun way to gamify the process in order to measure and add play to our movement, okay? Because we're able to add friendly competition between friends and family. We're able to measure it ourselves and be able to kind of compete with ourselves as well. But ultimately, you want to remember it is just one tool in the toolbox of movement, and it just happens to be one of the powerful tools that we have at our disposal. Okay, so bottom line, a step counter is a game changer when it comes to being able to get in more movement, because they are so simple, they are so cost effective, they are so easy to use, and it allows us to get a very quantifiable number when it comes to our movement, which is the amount of steps that we are actually doing. And obviously we talked about the benefits of walking, so it really allows us to be able to quantify how much walking is actually happening. Now, the last question that usually comes up with students when we talk about walking is, okay, cool. Coach, I understand. I'm going to go ahead and get my watch, and we talked about 10,000 steps, so I'm going to go ahead and start walking 10,000 steps tomorrow, right? Stick with me for a second, okay? The question usually is, hey, I walked 2,000 steps on average for the last week every single day, and now I'm just going to bump that up to 10,000 steps every single day. The answer is no, 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 because you always have to remember, what is that process of transformation? Our job is to be able to meet the student where they are at. The more change someone needs, the less they can handle. And big issues require little changes, and little changes will take care of big issues. And so you want to always keep these principles in mind when it comes to your transformation, as well as the transformation for your students, right? Remember, we talked about this. And so if you are averaging 2,000 steps per day, then all you really need to do is add on maybe an additional 1,000 steps per day for the rest of the week, right? So additional 1,000 steps or 1,500 steps, you aim for maybe 3,500 steps. And then what you are doing is you're slowly building that up. And so that way you can start to aim for, I'm going to do 3,000 steps per day for the upcoming week. If I can stick with that, then I'm going to go ahead and up it up to 5,000 steps. And then I can stick with that, and then I'm going to up it up. And then eventually you are increasing your threshold and be able to get to that 10,000 steps if that's an arbitrary number that you want to reach, okay? So it's very important to mention that there is a step-by-step process of this. We don't want to just go ahead and overwhelm ourselves or overwhelm our students with this, okay? So with that being said, that was the second way out of the unlimited ways that we are exploring in order to move. We talked about the movement menu, and now we've spoken about the simple method, which is just walking. What we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to go ahead and talk about the third way here, which is how to move advanced. Again, unlimited ways. We're just touching on 3 of them. Let's go ahead and talk about this third aspect now, which is how to move advanced. And so the question might come up, is there more to movement than just a movement menu and walking? The answer to that question is absolutely, right? In fact, there are entire professions that are built on advanced movement alone, right? So how do we actually simplify those? How do we actually put those other advanced understandings of movement together in a way that we can understand it very simply? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are fortunate to be a part of the Remote Wellness Academy, where we literally simplify everything for you. And so that's where I want to go ahead and introduce you to the 4 pillars within the pillar of movement. And those 4 pillars are mobility, cardiovascular, muscle building, and strength building. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like here. We have the pillar of movement. like we've been talking about, right? And then within that, we now have these 4 pillars right here, okay? So if I go ahead and zoom in a little bit more, you're gonna see that this is what it looks like. These are the 4 pillars when it comes to movement and the advanced understanding of movement. We have mobility, cardio, muscle, and strength. And so what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and briefly touch on these 4 for you, so that way you have a 30,000 foot overview, okay? So number 1, mobility. Mobility is the foundation of movement. It's basically where you work on your range of motion, where you work on your joints, where you work on your muscles stretching over your skeleton. And so ultimately, if you have poor range of motion, your muscles are tight and your joints are not stretched out, you can move but then end up hurting yourself, right? And so an example of this is if you're grinding your kneecap from years of improper range of motion, that can lead to having a knee surgery later on in life because your patella, your bone on your knee, ended up having to be grinded down over many, many years. And so this is why mobility is very important, right? Number 2, cardiovascular. This is all of the movement that's related to getting blood flowing and getting your heart rate up and getting a certain BPM, right? Beats per minute. And so it's important for heart health and being able to have stamina and endurance. That's cardiovascular. Number 3, muscle building, also known as hypertrophy or bodybuilding. This is where we focus on time under tension to create the most amount of growth within the muscle. And then number 4, we have strength building. And this is basically where we focus on the nervous system output and the density of the muscle fibers in order to increase the amount of output that the muscle can put out. And so that is AKA the amount of weight that can be lifted, AKA strength. And so that is a quick 30,000 foot overview of the 4 pillars of movement. Now, the other thing that's important to understand when it comes to the 4 pillars of movement is that there is a connection between all 4 of these pillars. There is a correlation between all of them. And so as an example, if you have poor mobility, then you'll be unable to completely have full range of motion in your strength lifts. So you'll not have good time under tension for muscle building. And you might also have poor cardio, which will impact your ability to do as many reps as you want. Now, if whatever I just said there went over your head like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, don't worry, because you don't need to know it. It's just important to note that within the pillar of movement, when you zoom out, there are other pillars that exist, okay? And then each of those pillars is a science in and of itself. There are literally professions that are dedicated to each of those pillars. That's literally the crux of basically what you got to know. And so if that's the crux of what you got to know, the question that you might have is, okay, but Coach Yasin, why don't we actually learn these 4 pillars of movement more in depth? And the answer to that is because in remote wellness specifically, when it comes to the remote wellness aspect of health, what we are doing is our major focus is primarily on overall health and overall wellness, okay? We focus on the transformation aspect of things, not the nitty-gritty of the actual physical movement. And so there's a reason why personal trainers and physical therapists and chiropractors and bodybuilding coaches and strength coaches and all of those other occupations, there's a reason why those exists. But for 90% of the population, hear me very clearly on this, for 90% of the population, we keep movement simple because that is the smallest change to get them the biggest and massive amounts of results. It's the best lever that we can actually pull for them. And so when we look at the health population distribution curve and we look at how health is distributed across the curve, we can see here that the vast majority of the population really needs more wellness. They're not trying to be athletes. You have to study anatomy and physiology and get all these certifications and degrees in order to help them. And then they're also not somebody who has a disease or an illness, and we don't focus on helping those individuals either because we focus within our scope of practice. And so ultimately what we want to go ahead and remember is that small hinges open big doors and big issues require little changes, and little changes will take care of big issues. Why is this so important? Let me go ahead and give you an example to really illustrate this and hit this point home. Because if you got Susie, who's your student or your client, to get into the gym and work on her quote unquote fitness by going out into the parking lot and picking up cars and tires and doing all this stuff, and then all of a sudden she's vomiting after the workout because she worked out too much and now she hates moving, and she does this all of a sudden, right? She does this very, very quickly. But then 6 months later, even if you're able to get her to stick to it for 6 months, guess what? She gets busy and then she ends up quitting. And so what happened is that you did not serve Susie, or you did not help her in any way. Because 6 years from now, it is not going to matter whether or not she was able to do all of this crazy activity for 6 months or not. It's just not going to matter in the long term, right? And ultimately, those people who do this to Susie, they have done Susie a disservice, okay? And unfortunately, what we are talking about here is all too common in the spaces that are all about like fitness coaches and personal training and the gym world, because they put too much of an emphasis on exercise and fitness and they identify as that, right? However, instead of doing all of this, if you were just able to get Susie to move and enjoy moving because she finds something that is playful, she finds something that is fun, she finds something that is pleasurable for her, and let's say, for example, she finds pleasure and playfulness out of going on a walk for 15 minutes a day with her husband and kids, well, guess what you've done for her? What you've done for her is that you have decreased the likelihood of early risk of death by 22% for her, right? You have increased her life expectancy by upwards of 2 decades. You have gone ahead and decreased by 50% the likelihood of premature death. And so in summary, what you are doing is when you actually help Susie do something that she can stick with because she's able to enjoy it, not only is she going to live 20 years longer potentially, you've decreased her risk of death by 22%, you've cut her early mortality risk by 50%. And on top of that, you've gone ahead and reduced her overall stress levels because she's doing something that she enjoys. Plus, all of the other benefits that we spoke about when it comes to moving, right? And so ultimately, my question to you is this: what serves Susie more? Going to the gym for 6 months and then quitting because she's not actually finding it enjoyable and it's too much for her and she gets busy and she's not able to actually make time to do that? Or getting her to walk for 15 minutes a day for the rest of her life? Okay, that is my question to you. And I hope the answer to that question is blatantly obvious and blatantly clear. Okay, and so that's why I want to go ahead and ask you this question. And I want to ask you this question very, very, very profoundly. Have your eyes been open yet to the power of what it is that we are talking about? Have your eyes been opened to why is it that we actually focus on movement the way that we do, right? Does it make sense why we don't focus on the other aspects of fitness and exercise inside of remote wellness when it comes to health? And instead what we do is we focus on sustainable lifestyle change that the average population can consistently do. Keyword there, consistently, right? Now, is there a place for other aspects of fitness and exercise for some students? Absolutely. To deny and say that, oh, you know what? These simple methods of lifestyle and habit change are for everyone and for all the goals, it goes against what we're talking about here, right? Obviously, for muscle building, you can't just walk all the time and get jacked and have muscles and have the appearance that you want. So there is a time and place for the other aspects of movement as well. Will you help them with that? Possibly. And we can focus on that when the time comes on a student by student basis. But what you want to understand and what I am emphasizing for you here is that for 90+% of students, we keep the movement simple, aka walking, and we stick to the movement menu, because that is what is going to facilitate the greatest transformation through that simple and enjoyable lifestyle and habit change that ultimately, it doesn't matter if they're able to stick to whatever gym protocol that you were able to create for them for 6 months or a year, because of the fact that if they drop off over the course of their entire life, it's not going to matter. And so what actually matters is the things that they can stick with, and the things that they are going to stick with is actually going to be the things that they find enjoyable and are simple and easy to do. Does that make sense? I hope so. And so that is the third way that we were going to go ahead and explore here when it comes to movement, right? We've talked about how to move with the movement menu. We've talked about how to move the simple way, which was walking. And now we've talked about the advanced pillars of movement as well. Now, before we go on to the next W here, I do want to go ahead and make a quick note about movement and calories, because the question might come up is, hey, do we care about counting calories from movement? Okay, now I want to make this very clear to you. Tracking calories from movement is by far one of the most difficult things to do. No matter how much your Fitbit or Apple Watch claims that it can tell you how many calories you burned while you're doing X activity, the truth is that there are so many factors that are in place when it comes to tracking calories that are burned from movement that it makes it basically impossible to get correct, okay? And this is one of the reasons why we don't track calories from movement, and also why we don't factor it into our caloric goals, okay? Now, we are going to talk more about this when we talk about connecting nutrition and movement, but I did want to just go ahead and lightly touch on the topic here as just an example, right? If you were to go ahead and say, you know what, for my goals, I have to eat 2,500 calories every single day, but I'm going to go ahead and add, 500 calories worth of walking, so that way I can actually eat 3,000 calories a day. But then here's the thing, like we just talked about, it's almost impossible to make sure that you're accurately tracking what 500 calories of movement looks like. There is no device that can do it accurately. There are just too many factors involved, right? And so what you would do then is that you would actually end up eating 500 calories more, but you might not actually know if you burned those extra 500 calories. And so what you've done is you've taken a system that was just counting calories from food, and now you've added this uncertainty and this complexity and this estimation. And so that is why it can get very hairy very, very fast. And that is the reason why we do not count movement inside of the caloric intake that we are doing, okay? So this is just a quick side note, okay? If everything I just went over made no sense to you, do not worry, you do not have to understand it. We will be talking more about it in an upcoming training, but it was just an important side note that I did want to go ahead and just mention very quickly, okay? So next up, let's go ahead and talk about movement when. So up until this point, we have now discussed movement what, we've gone ahead and discussed movement why, we've gone ahead and discussed movement how, and we are now going to go ahead and talk about movement when. Now, before we go ahead and do that, I want to go ahead and introduce you to our old friend who is roaming the earth with his escapades on his office chair. And it looks like he's gone ahead and decided to take a break over at the Niagara Falls in this training. And so in the same way as he is doing, as taking a break, it might be important for you to take a break right now, because like we always say, this is an e-learning environment. You are able to go ahead and break up the trainings. You do not have to do this in one sitting. And so if you need to go ahead and take a break right now, go ahead and do so, especially now that you see the advantages and the benefits of taking a 5-minute walk. Maybe that's something you go ahead and pause right now and go ahead and do that, and then come back to this training afterwards. But ultimately, I want you to know that you are doing phenomenal, you are doing great, and just go ahead and take that break if you need so right now. All right, welcome back from your quick break. Now that you are recouped and refreshed, let's go ahead and hop into the next W question for movement. That is movement when. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about when to move. Now, the question of when to move is one of those questions, like many other questions around health and wellness, that has a lot of dogma around it. What is dogma? We've talked about dogma a lot. We talked about how dogma in one of the previous trainings is rules that cannot be questioned. Some authority figure created these random arbitrary rules, and now all of a sudden they cannot be questioned. We're not talking about dogma here, right? Because a lot of people carry false beliefs and superstitions around, oh, you know what? You should move at XYZ time. This is the time that you should do it, right? And so many people end up should and should nodding all over themselves that they end up shoulding all over themselves, okay? And so at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong way to do this. There are just different optimal strategies for different individuals, okay? Because ultimately, the answer is to test and experiment to find out what works best for you, your body, your schedule, your lifestyle, right? And so that's ultimately going to be the most important thing, because at the end of the day, staying consistent is more important than any effects of what time you would actually do it, all right? Now, in order to actually explore this question of when to move, we're going to tackle this from two aspects, two parts, just like we did for nutrition. Part number one is going to be movement timing. And then part number two is going to be movement scheduling and planning, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about movement timing, part number one. So even though there is no best answer to when somebody should move, at the end of the day, there is something that is very clear to us, which is that our body loves pattern and routine. And so in the same way that we spoke about all of those concepts in nutrition when, all of those same concepts apply here when we talk about movement. Consistency is key, routine is key. And so our mind loves freedom, but our body loves routine. And so whatever we decide to do, we need to recognize that our body is a part of that natural cycle of nature. Now, is it helpful to go out and walk in the morning when the sun is shining and the sunrise is going on? Yes, there are studies that prove that. Is it helpful to go out and walk in the middle of the day so that way you can get a change of atmosphere and help you focus again? Yes, there are studies that prove that as well. Is it helpful to go out and decompress during the sunset so that way you can unwind during the day? Yes, there are studies that prove that as well, right? But the bottom line of all of these is that you need to be moving, period, okay? When? Bottom line, don't get stuck with all the dogma around it, right? Everybody's going to have their own thing that they say is that there's benefits to it, right? But all of those benefits are negligible if you don't actually move, because you don't get any of those. And so for some people, they might find, you know what? When I move at nighttime, certain actions, certain movements, certain types of activity, they get my blood pumping, and then all of a sudden I have difficulty going to bed. Well, for that person, they should probably avoid exercise before bed or movement before bed, right? For other people, there are certain types of movements that actually help them get better sleep, right? And so for those people, there's going to be different types of movements and different types of activities that are going to work for them. But the bottom line is this: just get it in, try to be consistent in the timing, observe, experiment, track the data, and find out what works best for you. Certain activities, you might be able to do them in the morning. You feel great when you do them in the morning. Other activities, you don't feel great when you do them in the morning. And so you're going to be able to have to experiment with all of these variables to say, you know what? I love walking in the morning. It's a nice stress relief. And then I love being able to do XYZ at nighttime, right? Or, you know what? I like to walk at nighttime because it helps me decompress and helps me get to bed so I can really start to kind of de-stress. But I love to do a different type of movement and a different type of activity in the morning time. So be it, right? That is part number one. Part number two is movement, scheduling, and planning, okay? So exactly like we spoke about with all of the benefits of planning when we spoke about nutrition, the same applies for movement as well. We do not want to get stuck like those people who have Niagara syndrome, who never plan things out in their life and never take the time to think ahead of time, right? Because I'm telling you right now, you will be absolutely shocked at how much of a difference setting an intention makes when you actually say, you know what, this week, I'm going to go ahead and do my playful movement at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. And then it actually gets done. It's a massive, massive, massive change when you actually set that intention, okay? And how do we do it? It's literally just as simple as taking out a few minutes inside of the week in order to plan ahead of time. And the best part about this is that you can really do it when you actually do your food planning. Literally what we talked about when we talked about nutrition planning, when we do the weekly resets, you can literally just plan, hey, when am I going to do my movement for the week, right? You can even make it something that you do with your spouse and have like a weekly spouse, husband, wife meeting in which you say, hey, let's go ahead and talk about what are we going to do for our nutrition? What are we going to do for our movement this week? And it's going to help you keep on track. And so whether that be at Sundays at 2 p.m., you do it at the same time every single week, you go ahead and plan it out. It's going to be so effective for you. And like we talked about before, why is this so important and why is this so effective? Because every battle is won before it is fought, okay? And so the battle of movement is also won before it is fought. And so that way, in the middle of the week, you don't end up with Niagara syndrome, finding yourself about to take a fall down the Niagara Falls because you didn't take the time to actually prepare. And so when you take the time to prepare ahead of time, it literally changes everything. And remember, just like we talked about, your plans are probably not going to work out how you think they are. Like 90% of the time, life throws something at you and it doesn't work that way that you thought it was going to work out. But the point of planning is not the actual plan. It's all about the process. And so this is one of my favorite quotes right here. Again, in preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but the actual planning process is indispensable. So that way, when you are in the war, when you are in the battle of the week that is going on, you are intimate with the details. You know, okay, this was my plan, but now I can shift and adjust because of the fact that this thing ended up coming up. But if you don't actually plan, you won't have a good understanding of what it looks like in the week, and you won't be able to pivot. And so that's what the gift that the planning process provides, is being able to have that understanding of what's going to happen, and then allowing yourself to pivot when things change during the week, but still allowing you to get what you wanted to get done. Now, having said that, I want to go ahead and emphasize here that when we talk about small hinges, right? I want to talk to you more about a few more small hinges. This concept of consistent moving timing and moving planning and scheduling, it falls into that category of small hinges open big doors. Why? Because when you get your student to plan out their week ahead of time, it literally only takes a few minutes a week, right? Imagine such a small hinge. But what it does is it opens such a big door, which is the biggest radical transformation in their health, because now they are prepared for what the week has in store from them. And so even though it is simple, do not be one of those people who gets confused and says, oh, it's simple. It's so simple. It's too simple to work, right? There has to be some bigger secret. There has to be something else involved. Do not get confused between simple and easy. Just because it's simple, the secrets of life is actually difficulty of sticking with it. And that's why the simple is not always easy. It's actually difficult to do. And so that is the question of when when it comes to movement. We've gone ahead and completed that. You're doing a phenomenal job. Stick with me here. We've gone ahead and completed so far 4 of the 6 questions. We're now going to go ahead and move over to the where question of movement. So let's go ahead and tackle this question of where to move. Right now, we've already spoken about how the where question is all about environment, right? And so the question of where to move is also about environment. And we already know that environment plays a massive role on being able to get the ball rolling on any area of life, and that also applies to movement. And so the first thing we're going to go ahead and talk about is the same way that we spoke about clearing the clutter inside of our nutrition environment. We're talking about clearing the clutter inside of our movement environment, okay? And so the question is, how do we clear the clutter in our movement environment, okay? And although we're going to be talking about a couple different examples, what I do want to go ahead and emphasize here, ultimately it is up to you and your specific situation to answer the question, what areas of my environment would help me be more successful with movement so that way I can create the conditions for health and wellness in my life? And so even though I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple examples here, do not get married to these examples. Do not be a remote control robot student who is unable to think for themselves. You want to be somebody who's resourceful, okay? And then on top of that, this is a very awesome exercise that you are able to walk your students through as well, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about a couple different areas in which you can actually clear the clutter for our movement environment. Number 1 is looking at the clothes, right? What are the clothes that we wear when we are actually going to move? Do they actually fit us? Do we enjoy wearing them, or are we just itching to get out of them, right? You can see if we don't enjoy the clothes that we are in when we move, then it's going to make it difficult for us from an environment standpoint to actually cultivate the environment to move. Number 2, same thing with shoes, right? Do you feel comfortable in the shoes that you wear, right? Or do you feel like, man, they don't fit me well, I got to go ahead and take them off? If that is the case for both clothes and shoes, guess what? You should create the environment to go ahead and get yourself clothes and shoes that you actually like wearing when you are moving, so it makes a pleasurable experience for you to do the thing that you want to get pleasure out of, okay? That's number 2. Number 3, other tools. What other tools are you going to need in order to be able to do the things that you want to do from your movement menu? And just an important note here, do not get sold on things, okay? Most of the things that you need in order to be able to move should either be free or at max inexpensive. Do not get sold on some tchotchke that somebody's trying to market to you that this is going to all of a sudden radically transform your health. Don't get sold into it, okay? Movement is very simple. At the end of the day, the hard thing is just doing it. And so that's why this is such an important note, okay? Number 4, accessibility, right? Making sure that the clothes and the shoes and the tools that you need are set up ahead of time, right? And what this does is it sets the intention and the ball in motion. 2 examples for this: putting your shoes and your clothes out the night before if you are going to be doing your movement in the morning. And then also maybe packing your clothes so that way you can have a change of clothes right after work, so that way you don't have to go home in order to get dressed, because what you do is you notice that, man, you know what? I get lazy and I start to relax when I get home. So I'm just going to pack my clothes ahead of time and then do my movement immediately after work without even having to go home. So this is just an example of how we can clear the clutter in our movement environment and facilitate and create and cultivate that environment that allows us to be able to move more. So that is the environment for movement. Now, here's another question. What about the outdoors environment for movement, right? Here's the thing that you got to know. For the vast majority of human history, we lived outside. We didn't live in these air-conditioned boxes that we live in today, okay? And so our bodies were designed to live and thrive outside. And so is it any surprise that we get some insane benefits when we actually choose to move outdoors? Surprise, surprise, there are so many benefits that come along with actually moving outdoors in terms of relaxing, reducing stress, reducing cortisol levels, muscle tension, and heart rate. All of those are reduced when we actually move outside. In addition to that, it lowers blood pressure and more vitamin D, less anxiety and depression, improves mood, improves sleep, improves self-esteem, improves better focus, improves immune system, good for your eyes. All of these are reasons why having an environment of moving outside is very beneficial for us as human beings. Now, having said that, does this all of a sudden become some dogma rule that we have to follow, right? Does that mean that I have to go outside? And so what happens is that some people will take this and they make this into a should and should not and say, oh, you know what? It's raining. Too bad. I can't go outside. Oh, too bad. I can't move. And just as an example, during COVID, for me, I literally walked 30 minutes a day around my bed like I was some kind of hamster inside of like a wheel or something, only because of the fact that I was like, yo, we can't go outside because the government said we can't go. And so all of a sudden I just walked inside. Simple, right? And so we're just mentioning the benefits of going outside as a North Star, as a recommendation, as a guideline, but do not take that to be a dogma rule. It is just something that is mentioned to be helpful. Okay, so that's very important to understand. Because ultimately, when we're talking about this question of movement wear, we always have to keep in mind, I'm going to keep repeating this over and over and over and over again until it's literally tattooed into your brain. Small hinges open big doors. Our job as remote wellness practitioners is to meet the student where they are at. The more change someone needs, the less change that they can handle. And big issues require little changes, and little changes will take care of big issues. And so ultimately, do not get confused between easy versus hard, simple versus complex. Just because it's simple, do not discredit it. The challenge is actually doing it consistently, okay? So ultimately, when we combine all of these coaching principles together, we find that the question of where to move is very similar to a lot of the other questions that we are answering. You got to start small. You got to be consistent, and over time it builds, just like everything else in life, okay? So this is why these principles are so important to remember for every single one of the 6 W's, regardless of what pillar of health we're talking about, or regardless of what area of life we are talking about as well. Beautiful. So that is movement wear. We have now gone ahead and completed 5 out of the 6 W's. Way to go. You are doing a phenomenal job. We are now going to hop into the movement who question, and this is going to be a really, really awesome one as well. Stick with me here, doing phenomenal. Let's go ahead and talk about the who question when it comes to movement. Now, if you remember, when we are talking about the who question, we are always talking about mindset, psychology, identity, becoming, beliefs, and character traits, okay? And so the same goes for when we go over the topic of who when it comes to movement, because ultimately the question is, who are you being when you are moving? What is your identity when it comes to movement? Because if you remember, we spoke about this in previous trainings. We spoke about the mind-body connection, and what you think influences your body, right? We spoke about the lemon. And then on top of that, to further prove this, if you didn't think that this concept also now applies to movement, well, here's a research study I want to go ahead and introduce you to, okay? This study was published in the Journal of Psychology Science from Harvard University. It is called Mindset Matters: Exercise and the Placebo Effect. Okay, let me walk you through what this study actually went through, okay? 2 groups of people who were hotel room attendants were informed about the amount of movement that they did in a specific day for their day job. And so the first group was told that the amount of movement that they did in their job was a good exercise, and it satisfied the recommendation from doctors about how much someone should move in order to have an active lifestyle, okay? That is what the first group was told. And then the second group was not told any information about how much movement they were doing inside of their day job, okay? And so then both groups were scientifically monitored for changes in their body. And guess what happened? 4 weeks later, the group that was informed about how much movement that they were getting in their day job and how it was an active lifestyle and how the doctor had approved it, the study showed that those people in that group had a decrease in blood pressure, had a decrease in body fat percentage, had a decrease in waist to hip ratio, and had a decrease in body mass index. Think about that for a second. I want you to really, really, really think about that. And here's the crazy part. Both groups of people actually did the exact same amount of movement in a day. The only difference was that one group was informed and they were told, hey, you are doing a good enough exercise, you are doing enough movement, and the other group was not. Think about how crazy that is here for a second, right? Mind blown. There were literal changes inside of their body, inside of their blood pressure. They lost more fat. They had a different waist to hip ratio, all based on what it is that they thought with their mind. Think about that for a second. This is an actual real world research study, not some mojo jojo that I just made up or someone just made up. Real world study. And here's the crazy thing about this. This actually works in the opposite way as well, okay? Placebo of exercise. Research finds simply believing that you do not exercise enough might shorten your life regardless of your actual activity levels. Think about that for a second. Just because you think, no matter what the actual activity levels are, you think that I'm not exercising enough, I'm not moving enough, and then as a result, you might actually have the opposite effect of all of this. That is absolutely insane. Mind blown. How crazy is that, right? And so remember this. Your beliefs create your experience, and your experience confirms your belief. And so to that individual who thinks, oh no, you know what? All of a sudden I'm not moving as much, that's going to affect my health. So think about this. I don't move enough. I will die early. That's the belief. That influences the action. The stress response is on, and the person doesn't feel like moving, right? Then that influences the outcome, which is their health actually goes down. And then it goes ahead and reinforces the belief. See, I was right. I don't move enough. See, I am having health issues. And then all of a sudden that influences the action, stress response on, they feel like not moving even more. And then as a result, the outcome that they get is early health issues and possible death. And then that circles back around. Now, in this case, if the person is no longer with us, obviously there's no more beliefs that are circling around, but you understand the point. This works for you and it also works against you. And so when you are doing the exercise, when you are doing the movement, the belief that you have when you are doing the movement makes a massive difference. Regardless of what the actual movement is, two people could be doing the exact same movement, but one person has a different belief, a different mindset, a different identity, a different character trait, a different identity statements, and they get a different outcome, even though they are doing the exact same activities and the exact same movements. Think about how crazy that is, and you can think about how much of this is related to what it is that we spoke about in Module 2, right? You see now why this who question is so absolutely fundamental, because who you are being when you do the doing influences the having, okay? Here, I'm gonna go ahead and prove this to you even more. As long as you believe what you are doing will yield positive results, that is going to make all the difference, okay? Meaning, when you are doing the movement, if you believe that it will lead to positive results, it actually does, okay? But the opposite is also true. If you are hating every single second of the movement that you are doing and you keep repeating to yourself, I have no belief that this is actually going to help me, guess what? It won't. And so regardless of what you are actually doing, mind-blowing, right? And so I always like this quote from Henry Ford. He said, if you say you can or if you say you can't, you are correct. Whatever you think and believe is going to actually occur when it comes to movement, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to sleep, when it comes to recharging, when it comes to any area of life, you are going to be influencing the actions because you're RAS. And when you influence the actions, you are then influencing the outcomes. And yet, even though we have this mountain of evidence that this is actually a factual understanding, society has still not caught up with this understanding. The current medical system, the current health system, the current wellness system is designed in two separate areas. There are doctors that treat the body, which is the vast majority of medicine, and then there are doctors that treat the mind. And rarely, if ever, does society incorporate both at the same time. And unfortunately, most of those in traditional health professions consistently insist that the whole thing about your mind has power over your body is just a bunch of mojo jojo. They fail to actually treat both sides together. And as a result, there are so many millions of people that become victims of this current system, when in reality, their issue wasn't some drug that they had to get on, and the actual truth was something far deeper than that, okay? And so ultimately, we talked about the world through the lens of belief. And so my question to you is this: what stories are you telling yourself right now about movement, right? Because it's so important to understand that your current beliefs about movement and your relationship with movement is what has created your current experience of movement, right? We talked about this before. Whatever you are experiencing in your life right now is all because of your current beliefs. If you want to know what someone's current beliefs are, then all you need to do is notice what they are currently experiencing. This is the window into someone's internal world, because ultimately where you are right now in your health, your wellness, your body is all a creation of your beliefs and your current identity. Because if you believe that you don't like movement, and that you're not one of those people who likes movements, then guess what? Your RAS is going to get to work to make you into one of those people who doesn't like movement, or is going to put you into situations where you are one of those people who doesn't like movement. It's just how belief and identity work. And so being someone who moves every single day is just not in alignment with somebody who has the belief that I don't like movement, right? And so because of the fact that they hold this belief, this is what the RAS and the beliefs are doing to their situation. And so this is where you need to get to work with your becoming journal and through the becoming process to really evolve your beliefs and your character traits in order to become your version 2.0 self. If your version 2.0 self loves to move every single day and finds it playful, then guess what's going to happen? It's going to be effortless for you, right? And so this is where when we talk about the becoming process and all of the things that we have broken down in the previous module, those are going to be absolutely critical for you and your students when it comes to the question of who, right? Because without working on your beliefs, without working on your character traits, without working on your identity statements, it's impossible for you to become someone who has a great relationship with movement if your current version 1.0 self simply does not believe it to be true, okay? Because remember, the question is not, who am I? The question is, who am I becoming? You can become someone who loves and enjoys and finds movement playful. You can, 100%. However, just like we have emphasized over and over and over again, you just must be willing to actually do the dang work in order to become somebody. Even when you face that resistance and you don't feel like doing it, you must work through and become that person. Does that make sense? I hope so. This is the power of what it is that we are talking about, even though the rest of society, even though the current school system, even all of those current institutions don't recognize the power of what it is that we are talking about. We see that the new world is upon us. This is a very new phenomenon that human beings are having to learn these new skill sets. It's never been something that we had to do. We are wired a different way. And so with the new world comes new skills and new ways of thinking. And so this is ultimately, when we talk about what we do as remote wellness practitioners, this is what we are doing. We are educating the human species about the truth and the real world behind the scenes regarding the new world that we live in. And this is something that society and this is something that school has not talked about, and yet it is absolutely critical for every single human being to know and understand in order to live in the new world. And so this is why the work that we are doing here at Remote Wellness Academy is so important. This is why for you as a remote wellness practitioner, for you as an RWA student, you are such an important part of all of this, because it is through you as a student here at Remote Wellness Academy and through your students that we can start to create a dent in the lack of understanding, the lack of skill set, the lack of transformation that society does not understand and is not equipped to be able to understand this new world that we live in. It is our responsibility with what it is that we are understanding, with these skills, with this understanding of transformation, that we need to get these tools and these understandings out to the vast majority of the population, because there are millions of people's lives who are at stake here in order for them to be able to live not only healthier and happier lives, in order for them to thrive instead of only survive, but on top of that, there are millions of people every single year that are dying as a result of the lack of tools and understandings around these concepts. And so even if you don't count the people who are experiencing premature death, well, what about the other millions and billions of people who are not having the most thriving life possible because of the fact that they don't have these tools inside of their arsenal? And so this is what it is that we are doing inside of the Remote Wellness Academy. But remember, even though this is all very exciting and very moving and very inspiring, we always have to remember that we don't go out there and just vomit all of this excitement onto our students. If we do that, then nobody in society is going to listen to us, right? What we have to always remember is we start with actions first, right? Just like we spoke about in previous WHO trainings, we start with actions and behaviors first. Because if we go out to society and just decide to unplug them from the matrix and we say, yo, it's all about belief and it's all about identity and you got to work on this and you got to work on that, well, guess what's going to happen? Your student and the rest of society is going to completely ghost you and run away from you because it's just trying to survive. And so we have to understand not only what is it that we are trying to convey, we're not only talking about the transformation and the tools and the skills and all that kind of stuff, but also how do we actually deliver that transformation? And obviously this is going to be something that we touch on a lot more in upcoming modules as well. Okay, so we focus on actions first because this allows them to start making progress. It allows them to start building trust. So that way we can go deeper and deeper. Remember, remote wellness is 20% information, 80% transformation. And so you do not want to be the human Google that is trying to deliver information. Your job as an RWP is to deliver transformation, okay? Because ultimately, like we have spoken about many times before, that is where the value is, in the transformation bridge between knowledge and action. That is where the bridge lies from who your student is right now to who they can become in order to have their best life. And that is where the true value of remote wellness is. That is why people hire you. That is why people will pay you more than you ever believed was possible. As long as you are going through this journey yourself, then you will be able to help others go through that transformation as well. As long as you stick to the program, you take this program seriously, you do the action steps, and obviously don't worry, we are here to support you so that way you have enough practice, as we will discuss in upcoming modules as well. Beautiful. So that is when we talk about movement, that is the who question there. A couple big bullet points regarding the who. Stories that you tell yourself about movement are the number one determining factors for health and wellness. Stories are essentially beliefs that come from early programming. Who you are being equals what your body is doing. Your programming determines your identity, beliefs, decisions, and actions. If we ourselves are different people, we do different actions than what we would have done in previous states of being, and therefore we get different results. Ultimately, the question is, who are you being when you are moving? But transformational work begins at the level of actions and behaviors because we don't want to overwhelm our students, okay? So with that being said, as we start to close out this last question of movement, I do want to go ahead and make a quick note here. Obviously, we could go ahead and have an entire activity regarding updating your Becoming Journal specifically for movement. However, it is not a part of the activity for this training, but I just want to go ahead and mention that if and when you ever needed, you could create a completely new identity for yourself around movement, right? And so do you now see how versatile this Becoming Journal is? It really is a container and a sandbox for you to be able to mold and shift your identity according to what serves you best in the season of life that you are in. It's the container that holds your identity of who you are becoming. And so some questions to consider when it comes to movement and you becoming your version 2.0 self. Number one, what if I was somebody for whom exercise was fun? Number two, what if I was someone for whom moving my body was fun? What if I was someone who loved to have fun and play through movement? These are really good, phenomenal questions that really start to kind of change and reframe and give you a different perspective of this new identity and this new character that you could become as your version 2.0 self if you wanted to get better within the domain of movement. And so I would really urge you, if you are looking to build a version 2.0 character that loves movement, really take the time to think through these questions, because ultimately the power of identity shifting, the power of shifting our beliefs and our character traits and our identity statement, that is the power that allows us to unlock everything else. Because ultimately, until we become the person, we will be stuck in our current situation, unable to attain our desired situation, right? We need to actually become the person who effortlessly creates the desired situation, right? And so right here, we must become the person who effortlessly creates our desired situation. And then once we become that person, doing the actions becomes effortless. And then when doing the actions becomes effortless for us, the reality that we want will manifest itself automatically and effortlessly because we have become that person who can sustain that new reality. And so as we really start to close out this training here, I want to start to bring it all together for you. I really want you to look back and say, wow, look at how far we have come in your understanding of movement. We've gone ahead and gone through all 6 W questions for movement. And you can really start to see, once you start to understand just one of the pillars of health, like we talked about the 6 W's of nutrition, you start to see like, yo, wait a second. I understand the foundations of the 6 W's now, and it really starts to become fluid. I start to see the patterns. I start to see the similarities when it comes to all of the different pillars and how they revolve around some of the similar questions, right? And so just imagine for a second, all of this is what you are adding to your toolbox as a remote wellness practitioner to ensure that you are not a one-trick pony, but you are somebody that has a wealth of understanding when it comes to the domain of health. And so what this allows us to do is it really allows us to honestly create an unlimited number of activities when it comes to actually helping others with this transformation, right? Because now that you understand the 6 W's of movement, you can see that there are so many different activities that could be created around this topic to help students with their transformation, right? You could come up with activities like updating your Becoming Journal for Movement. Yeah, that could be an activity by itself. Creating your own movement menu. Yep, that could be an activity by itself. Creating movement timing and consistency and working on that. Yep, that could be an activity by itself. Movement planning and scheduling for the week. Yep, we can go ahead and create an activity around that as well. So there are so many activities that are possible to be created from this training alone, right? Now, obviously, we're not going to walk you through all of those activities inside of this training, but the reason why I'm mentioning it is because I want you to know that all of that is available to you if and when your student ever needs them. They can be created because of the fact that all those activities do exist. And so at the end of the day, this is what I want you to understand. We will talk more about how you are going to implement all of this in Module 5, okay? So hang in there. But I'm really opening your eyes to be like, wow, look at this massive toolbox that I have that allows me to provide so much value to every single human being that I come across. And then on top of that, when we get to Module 5, we're going to be providing for you all of the templates, the swipe files, copy and paste, plug and play programs. So that way it's going to be completely effortless for you once you actually get your certification and start having your own students. But really, honestly, when you step back and start to look at all of this, it starts to become very, very, very impressive when you see how many tools are actually in your toolbox when you are ready to start having your own transformation program, right? And so this is what we talk about when we talk about learning to provide value, when we talk about phase 1 of this program, when we talk about having the power to then put into production, learning how to be able to be valuable, aka your ability to provide value. And then when we get to the income and the business training, you can then learn to charge from it. And so by the end of this process of your certification, value will be oozing out of your pores. It's going to be impossible for you not to be able to provide value to your students, okay? And then you will be ready to go ahead and learn how to charge for it, aka the income and the business training. And the coolest part about all of this is that we're really not done yet, right? We have so much more goodness in store for you to become so much more valuable to every single human being that you come across for the rest of your life. Because ultimately, I want you to remember this. You may not be ready right now, but through this process, you will become ready, okay? By the end of this process, you will have a product, and that product is you and your transformation program that you will be able to charge $1,200, $2,400, $3,600 for your transformation programs. And so really all we are in right now, when we talk about certification and we talk about remote wellness certification, what we are talking about is you can almost imagine it like product development. What's happening right now is that your product is being developed. But the difference is, and the beauty of this, is that this is not some spatula that you're going to go ahead and sell on a website. The product is a skill set that you are learning that is a part of you that you are going to have for the rest of your life. And that is the strength of it. There's no government, there is no entity, there's no Amazon shutting down your FBA account. None of that. None of that exists because of the fact that you have full control over this product. And it's something that has high margins, no shipping, no logistics. This is the value of what it is that we are building here. And I hope you can understand that and I hope you can see that. Okay, so strap in. It's only going to get better from here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop over to your activity for this training. Inside of this training, we're going to be going over the 6-day steps challenge. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be actually practicing one of the simplest and most beneficial ways to move, which is walking. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by actually tracking our steps. And this is going to be one of the most common ways that you help your students move as well. And remember, this is just one of the many activities that can be created around movement. Okay. Now, for some of you who do have maybe active day jobs, this is going to be easier for you than for other people. But remember, the point is not to just hit the steps. The point of these activities, in addition to it being something that is beneficial for you and your health transformation, the point is to go through the experience of what is it like to actually track your steps and increase them. Because when you go through the experience, you will then have something to contribute to your students and be able to make this activity yours inside of your own remote wellness practice when we get there, okay? And so ultimately, that is going to be the activity for this specific training. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut over to a quick mini training that is going to talk to you about the 6-day steps challenge. All right, welcome to this quick mini training about the 6-day steps challenge. And so just as a reminder, like all of the worksheets inside of this program, make sure you make your own copy. You will not be able to edit this template. Make sure you click on File, Make a Copy. And so similar to a lot of the 6-day experiments and challenges that we have gone through inside of this program, this 6-day challenge is divided between observation and experimentation. And then there are 2 sheets. There is the worksheet underneath it, and then there are the instructions. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through the instructions for the part 1 3-day observation. So part number 1 on here, what you're going to do is you are going to need a step counter in order to do this challenge. And we do recommend one. We've linked one inside of the actual instructions. However, do remember that you can use a Fitbit, an Apple Watch. It doesn't even have to be the one that we've linked in there. It doesn't matter what it looks like. We would just recommend a watch over a phone or something. That's just a recommendation. And then for the 3-day observation, what you're going to do is you're not going to make any changes to the number of steps that you currently walk. Okay, so what you're going to do is for the first 3 days, you're just going to observe how many steps you are walking every single day. And then on the worksheet below, which I'll show you here in a second, for the first 3 days, at the end of the day, you are going to go ahead and mark how many steps you walked for that day, right? And then also in the worksheet below, you're going to indicate things that you observe, right? What time did you find you got the most amount of steps in? Was it easy? Was it difficult? What was it like? All these observations, right? Now remember, for this first part, you are not making any changes. All you're doing is you're observing and you are noting. That is all, okay? And so let me show you what that worksheet part of this would look like on here. Right over here for the observe section, what we're doing is we're going ahead and putting the date, let's say like 5/23/2023, right? And then all we're doing is writing, okay, on this day, which was a Monday, for example, I don't even know if it's a Monday, just as an example, at the end of the day, I'm going to write down, okay, right before I went to bed, on this day, I walked, 5,000 steps, whatever that might be. Now, does it have to be at the end of the day before you go to bed? No. You can do it the next day. When you wake up, you can say, okay, you know what? Let's see how many steps I walked on that Monday. However, if you have a watch that actually clears at midnight every single night and there is no way to get a record of it, you want to make sure that you jot it down or take a screenshot of it or whatever before you actually go to bed. Otherwise, you're going to lose that data, okay? So either way, you got to get the steps that you walked on that specific date, okay? And then your observations are going to go here. And then obviously you repeat it for day 2. And then you repeat it for day number 3. Okay, so that's 3 days of observation. Now we're going to go overhead and talk about part number 2, which is the experimentation. So in the second 3 days, what we're going to do is we're going to start making changes to the number of steps that we walk. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a baseline based off of what it is that we observed in part 1 of the actual challenge. And then we're going to go ahead and slightly increase them in order for us to get more movement in. Okay, so what we do is we take the average. And if you don't know how to take an average, you basically just add up. So you take 1 plus 2 plus 3, however many steps you walk. So let's say it was like 3,000, 4,000, and then you take, let's say, another 3,000, okay? And so you add these up. So you go 3,000 plus 4,000, you got 7,000 there. And then 7,000 plus another 3,000, you're at 10,000, okay? And so you can do 10,000 steps in those 3 days. And then you're going to divide by the number of days that you had. So you can divide by 3, okay? So that means that your average over these 3 days, 3,000, 4,000, 3,000 was actually 3,333. Okay, I just did that off the top of my head, but that's just an example. And so what you're going to do is you're going to average out how many steps you walked on these 3 days, and then you're going to take that average and you're going to slightly increase it. So let's say my average is 3,333. From there, for the second 3 days in the experiment, I'm going to go ahead and increase that maybe to, let's say, 5,000, right? If 5,000 seems like too big of a jump, you can increase that to 4,000, 4,500. It doesn't matter, but the point is that you're not just jumping from 3,333 all the way to 10,000 overnight. You want to increase it slowly. And the reason we take an average is because we want to go ahead and smooth out any irregularities that might have happened. Now, theoretically, if you wanted to get like really proper data, obviously Saturdays and Sundays might be different amounts of steps. During the weekdays might be different amounts of steps. If you want to get a proper average, you can do the observation for like 6 or 7 days and then increase off of that as well, right? So there's different ways that you can do it. For the sake of the challenge, is the way we have it outlined. It's 3 days average, but you can always increase this for yourself or for your students, okay? So we're going to go ahead and increase the step count. And then we're also going to notice any changes in like, hey, does walking in the morning versus the evening affect our mood, right? Do we find it helpful if we actually schedule and plan the walks, and how are we actually going to get the steps in? When do we find that it's actually best for us to be able to get those steps in every single day? We're going to go ahead and experiment with all of these variables in the second part of all of this, right? And so over here on the worksheet side, you'll see once I have my daily step target, so let's say for example, it was averaged over here 3,333, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to do 5,000. So I'm going to write that down right here, 5,000. And then now it's, let's say 2023. Now I'm going to say, cool, let me see how many steps did I actually walk. So on this day, maybe I got 5,500, which is 500 above my target, which is phenomenal. Then on this day, I got, 4,500. And then on this day, I got, let's say 5,000. Now here's the thing. You don't want to beat yourself up, right? This is not about having dogma and then self-abusing yourself and I did 500 steps on one day. Because the cool thing about this is that if you average all of this out, the 500 that you had extra here averaged out. And so your average was actually 5,000 for these 3 days, which is phenomenal. However, you do not want to get stuck into a very common trap that a lot of students do. Is like, I walked 3,000, but it's okay because the next day I'm just going to add additional 2,000. So on this day, I'm going to walk 8,000. Do not do that. Just count your losses. It's okay. It's not a big deal. Just let them go. And then the next day, aim for another 5,000. Do not try to add up and be like, cool, I did 3,000. Next day, I'm going to try to do 8,000. It's not going to work that way. You want to be consistent. And so it's okay. Cut your losses right here. It's okay. And aim for 5,000 on this day. Do not have this mentality where I'm going to try to make it up the next day. It's a terrible disease, poison of a mentality. You want to cut it out and you want to make sure that you just start fresh the next day. Okay. And then obviously you want to make any notes around your experiment here. Now, the other thing I want to mention, this does not have to be printed out. You can do this electronically if you find that is helpful for you. If you're able to make a Google Sheet, Google Slides, Excel, whatever it might be, if you want to do it that way, you find that that's helpful for you, do it whatever way works best for you. But the point is to do it. So that way, when you have your students do it, you can talk from your experience. Okay. And so ultimately that is what the 6-day steps challenge looks like. There is going to be a student community post for this as well that we'll talk towards the end of the main training. So that way you can let us know how the steps challenge went. So make sure that you are actually doing it and enjoying it and having a playful time with it, because it is a very, very fun activity to do. And I'm really, really excited for you to go ahead and complete the 6-day steps challenge. And with that being said, let's go ahead and hop back over to the main training. All right, welcome back from that quick mini training about the 6-day steps challenge. Like we have spoken about many times before, a lot of many's in there, is that this experience is going to be very valuable for you. So please do not be lazy with it. You want to make sure that you are working hard to go through the experience, because that is ultimately what's going to allow you to make this your own inside of your own remote wellness practice. Okay, so as we start to close out this training, let's go ahead and talk about your engagement post questions for this specific training. We have 3 of them. Number 1, what was your biggest takeaway from this training about movement, the 6 W's? Number 2, summarize what you learned. What are your thoughts on movement, 6 W's, right? Number 3, what aha moments did you have from this training? Again, just as always, do not be lazy with this engagement question. It really is for you to be able to cement what it is that you got from this. You can provide us feedback. You can let us know what you liked from the training. That's always very appreciated. Ultimately, this is your opportunity to engage. We love to hear from you, and we do read all of your comments. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about your action steps for this specific training. There are going to be a total of 5 of them. Number 1, you're going to go ahead and watch this training and study it in full. Number 2, you're going to complete the engagement questions for this training, the ones that we just spoke about up above. Number 3, you're going to go ahead and get your step counter ready. And so if you already have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something similar, you can just use that. If you don't have something like that, you can purchase one for like $20 or a similar one. It doesn't have to be the one that we recommend, but the link is available for you. Just as a recommendation, it is recommended to use some sort of watch instead of your phone, because it is easier to go ahead and track steps that way. Action step number 4 is you're going to go ahead and complete the 6-day steps challenge activity, like we talked about up above. And then finally, action step number 5 is you're going to go ahead and comment on the 6-day steps challenge activity post, and you are going to let us know how many steps on average did you walk from the observation period? What did you increase your steps to during the experimentation piece of it? What time of the day did you find that it works best for you to get your steps in? What did you learn from this activity? What benefits did you notice? And then also, what are your thoughts on this activity for your students, right? Really, we're trying to plant those seeds and get you starting to think about these activities for your students as we get closer and closer to some of the later modules, okay? So focus on those action steps, get them done. And this was a phenomenal jam-packed training. I'm really excited for you to crush these action steps. And with that being said, I will catch you on the next training.